Hello and welcome to another podcast of Father and Joe. I'm Joe Rocky here with Father Boniface Hicks. And Father, I was actually at a funeral mass here today and also with the feast of Christ the King being the last mass that before we recorded this. It brought a couple of different thoughts into my head, some things that we had discussed before in the episodes, some things that I've heard from the Pope say. And I think I have a lot of puzzle pieces on the board, and I don't think I've actually made the complete picture yet. So, going from one of the things that you've said before is that there's actually two judgments, and then that part confuses me altogether. So just the closer right there, and I wanted to just start with there, and then go into some of the things that I think I understood from the Pope, which I probably didn't. So let's just start with the concept of how are there two judgments? How does that even work?
Yeah, well, it confuses me too, Joe, so it's it's okay. Uh, the we talk about a particular judgment, which is what happens at the moment of our death. So each one of us dies at a different time. Each one of us has, therefore, a particular judgment at that time of our death. Part of the problem is that time gets really confusing when you step outside of time. So, how people who have entered into eternity, which is what we do after death, we leave the confines of this world and its changing nature in time, and we enter into another world in which we are in eternity. We enter into eternity. And so, since that's outside of time, things get really confusing about how that all matches up, how it synchronizes. And so, we start to like things get a little fuzzy. So, you're feeling that things are fuzzy. I think that's about just about right. Now, there may be doctors of the church who have more sophisticated ways of explaining this than I do. I haven't found those explanations yet. When I do, I'll let you know. But in the meantime, just to use the language that the church uses and to speak in the kind of fuzziness, allow me the fuzziness. We talk about a particular moment, judgment at the moment, the time of our death, in which we are confronted with our sins, and then we enter into also some kind of purification. We talk about purgatory. Again, we talk about purgatory in terms of time. We used to really do this before the Second Vatican Council. We talk about years off of purgatory, decades, hundreds of years, thousands of years off of purgatory, and we have this sense that people are going through purgatory now, and so our prayers for them now affect their journey, but they're really already outside of time. So anyway, things are a little fuzzy, but just to think of the way that the church has presented it to us, from the scriptures. It's not just the church's idea, but the saints in the church have presented it to us in a way that's accessible to us who are in time. We have the idea that let's make it personal and talk about my mother. That way, we're not talking about anybody else's sensitive areas. My mother, who died 3 years ago, and I offer mass for her. I do some sacrifices for her, some prayers. We talk about indulgences, the grace of helping someone in their journey of purification. The church calls those indulgences, certain prayers and sacrifices, penances, offering mass, and I'm doing that in an ongoing way. And we think of it in terms of our people who have died also journeying through this ongoing purification, and we're supporting them on that journey through time. So now the particular judgment is at the moment of her death. My mother was judged. I hope and pray that she was judged in a way that she at least went to purgatory to have further purification, but on her way to heaven. Once we're judged to be among the just, then we're in purgatory, and perhaps already moving into our final position, our final purification and union with God. Or someone would be judged as going to hell, being condemned, because Jesus gives us some criteria, like, as long as you did not do it to one of these least of my brethren, you did not do it to me. Matthew 25, we talk about that that judgment. We talk about, unless you become like this child, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. Jesus also says that. We talk about Jesus as our Savior. What you have to believe in your heart and confess with your lips that Jesus is Lord. Jesus talks about the Eucharist. Whoever eats my body and drinks my blood, I live in him and he lives in me, and he will have eternal life. I will raise him up on the last day. So there are a lot of different things that go into this final judgment and how God does this judgment. And it's not as clear as a court of law in the sense that there are a lot of factors, and we don't know exactly how God stacks up all of that. That's why we maximize and do as much as we can. We respond as fully as we can. We give our lives to God as fully as we can. So death, particular judgment, a lot of different criteria that go into that. Those who are judged worthy of heaven may go undergo ongoing purification, and then we talk about another definitive moment in history and time, which is the second coming, and that goes together with the final judgment. And one of the key points of that is that we receive a body at that point, and it's a different kind of body than the one we have now because it's a body that doesn't decay, that never dies. And it's St. Paul calls it a spiritual body as opposed to our physical body or natural body. It's the translations are a little funny, but uh, we receive a body, and we enter into a new heaven and a new earth, and we do that all together. So the second judgment is all together. It's the entire human race from beginning to end, and it's the definitive judgment, the final judgment, because the entire human race together is judged, renewed, restored to their bodies, and then to heaven or hell, period. So the purification is done, the everything is done, and we're finally given a body, a spiritual body, and then advanced to heaven, condemned to hell. And those in hell suffer more in their bodies. So they're not particularly, those who have already been condemned in the particular judgment are not necessarily looking forward to having their bodies back. So we understand those who are judged worthy of heaven and maybe being purified in an ongoing way also long for their bodies and to be united in the way that we will be and as embodied creatures, like Jesus in his body has ascended to the right hand of the Father. Mary in her body has been assumed into heaven and is with Jesus and the Father in heaven. So we will receive our bodies, but that'll be the definitive judgment. That will be the end of time. That will be the new age that is begins the new heavens and the new earth and whatever all that looks like. I mean, our imaginations, eye has not seen and ear has not heard what God, nor is the mind so much as conceived what God has prepared for those who love him. So our imaginations fall a bit short in all of this, but hopefully I've sketched out enough territory now that we can talk about a first judgment, particular at the time of our death, a final judgment at the end of time, the entire human race. At the final judgment, we also receive our body and we enter into a new heavens and a new earth.
So on that, and then as we've kind of discussed that concept of time, that once you pass away, you leave the spectrum of time. How the resurrection is the glory and graces of the resurrection are continuous throughout history, essentially. So my question, I guess, becomes the first one at the points of our death is judging us as far as how we lived our lives. Did we make the world better or worse by us being here? And you outlined some of the ways that Jesus explicitly says to do that. And then we go into one of three options: hell, purgatory, or heaven. And the point of purgatory is essentially extra time to get pure enough to be able to go into heaven or not. So I'm assuming then that that final judgment is the shot clock's done for everyone. Where are you at on your test? Time to hand it in type thing. And that's just a cutoff line. Either you made it or you didn't. Is that a group decision, or is that a still an individual situation?
you're scratching at the question that is begged by this. How is the second judgment different than the first judgment? And in some sense, I guess I would say I don't know. I don't know that it is really the the decision. I guess the thing about the final judgment is, theoretically there would be those who are still alive at the time of the second coming. So the second judgment just corresponds with the end of time, and it's kind of the definitive movement, final chapter for everyone. So there isn't and it's not like you have to hurry up and get through purgatory in order to make it in time for the final judgment. If you've been judged worthy to be in purgatory, you make it through purgatory. So that purification does fully happen, and there's no worry about that. But the final judgment is just sort of this final passage. The particular judgment and final judgment actually coincide for some people who would still be here at the time of the second coming. And for others who have died, it'll be a kind of reunion. But it all comes together, and I guess the so judgment, as if there were a different decision, is not maybe a good way to think about it. But in terms of that, the decision is made, and that's where the image of Matthew 25, with the separation of the sheep and the goats. It's all of humanity together, and then that separation takes place. Now they're already sheep and goats at that point, so the judgment has in some sense already happened. They're already different creatures, we might say, based on how we have lived, how we've responded to the grace of God, how we've been purified through our time in purgatory, how we've been judged at our particular judgment. It's already kind of made us what we are, but then that final chapter takes place, and the deal is sealed, we might say, and we receive our bodies and enter into you know the next world or whatever.
And I guess to that point, there's a further question is, every time we've discussed the second coming is at the end of the world, almost as Jesus is bringing the button and pushing it, he's showing up just to do that. Is that all it's going to be, or is it going to be similar to the first time when he's teaching us stuff along the way?
No, the second coming is in glory, and that will be the end of the world. Yeah, that's fairly clear in the church's teaching. Exactly what that looks like is, there aren't real super clear accounts. I mean, Jesus uses some apocalyptic imagery like earthquakes and storms and wars, insurrections from place to place, and he talks about coming in the same way that he has departed. With the apostles saw him ascend in a cloud in glory, and he's talked about coming back in the same way. Is he speaking of that literally about that moment, or anyway, it's a little unclear, but he's not going to be born in a manger. He's going to come in glory, and that's going to be the end of time. It's not a revisiting earth to sort of try again. Now, would he do some teaching as he comes? What does it mean to come in glory? I don't know, but it would be different than the first coming for sure. That's clear.
Fair enough. Um, so that's part of the question there. So I know that when we had our discussion in the past about how kind of purgatory works, you gave the analogy that it's, again, being a relationship, that those who ultimately want to be closer to God work towards it, and those who want to be more distant from God essentially put themselves further away from God, which is hell is the absence of God. So in a sense, it's you put yourself there by how much you wanted to live the relationship and listen to the commands of Jesus, essentially. And it makes me think of something that, again, could have been misquoted, because things that come from the Vatican tend to be misquoted the more I've adult looked at things. But one of the things I recall the Pope saying, or at least articulated to me as the way the Pope said it, was that this modern concept of social group justice is a demonic idea. And I wanted to see if that actually is in line with the teachings of the church. And since we are talking about judgment, it seems like this would be the appropriate time to have that type of conversation.
Social group justice.
Yes, as in basically saying that if you're in this group, um, you are doing things right, and therefore, because you're strictly in this group, nothing you can do is wrong. And if you're born into this other group, you are wrong by a starting point. Now, intellectually, that seems like that would be very much against what the church is teaching, but it is a movement that seems to have weight across in different people's articulations of thought.
Yeah, that would definitely be heretical. I mean, it would be a kind of class system, the Hindu class system of whatever that is, 5 or 7 or 9 different classes of people from the highest class. That name escapes me now. Down to the untouchables, and uh, that you're born into that, and that through a process of death and uh, regeneration, you would maybe you'd move up or down depending on the kind of karma you had when you died. I mean, that's certainly not Christian. And so the idea that you're born into a class, and another Christian heresy that developed around that was this idea of double predestination, that God has destined some for heaven and some for hell, and you don't know what you're destined for. That, but you kind of live out your life, and you might get to guess at some point, because of how God seems to be working with you as if you're one of the elect, that you're destined for heaven, and otherwise you're destined for hell. So that idea of double predestination was also condemned as a heresy. That's what we find. John Calvin promoted that, and others subsequently have promoted that idea, um, with a misreading of Romans 9 and 10, maybe. Um, or that there would be some other, kind of group. Uh, I suppose you could say, to a certain extent, those who are like born into the Catholic Church, eh, baptized as infants, would be kind of part of an elect group, and those who are born outside of the church or never come to know Christ would be part of another group, and that would be condemned. And certainly that is not something we'd hold either. God willed for all men to be saved and come to the knowledge of truth. First Timothy 2 or something. I can't remember where that is, but that God desired all men to be saved and come to the knowledge of truth. So the Lord makes everything available for every individual. There is always a little bit of a balance, a creative tension that exists between the individual and the relationships. An individual who is entirely individual also will not be saved, in the sense that we're always saved through the church. We're really saved through relationships. And to illustrate in a kind of concrete way, you can't baptize yourself. So we're always baptized by somebody. We learn the faith from somebody. We receive it from through relationships, and then we're called to be part of relationships, and that relationship in a fundamental way with the church and with other Christians, other Catholics, and then we have relationships in which we serve, we give love, and we receive love, and so those relationships have we kind of help each other along in that, and uh, now sometimes those relationships are have some deficiencies, and they lead us into sin, and sometimes they are very grace filled, and they lead us to humility and grace and salvation. So, but we are really saved in relationship. It's a kind of Americanism to conceive of too much of this too highly individualized version of Christianity. We're really meant to be saved together. But at the end of the day, I'm ultimately responsible for what I do. And this is the kind of parable of the watchman in the prophet Ezekiel. He says, if somebody's doing something wrong and you tell them and they change, good for both of you. If you tell them and they don't change, that's on them, not on you. But if you don't tell them, that's on you. And so we have a responsibility to our brothers and sisters, that we can't just live out our lives as isolated individuals and wash our hands of everybody else's salvation. I am my brother's keeper. And so those relationships are really important in terms of our salvation. And that's why we see that even still in terms of purgatory, that somebody who is in purgatory benefits from my prayers, from my sacrifices. We're still in relationship, and so I can support them in that process of purification.
And I think that we've touched upon that idea a couple of times as far as being responsible to have a kind of relationship where you can tell people that they're messing up and also put ourselves in a situation where we're able to listen to it. That's one of the things that you've mentioned before, and humility being such an important part of growth in life spiritually, in that, it does take humbleness to hear that you're doing something wrong and then to act upon it, whether it be act upon it immediately or act upon it down the road, to listen to it without shooting the messenger, so to say, and sometimes literally, it is an important act of the faith. So, I always try to do things in this podcast to try to point out how there's practical benefits of actively becoming closer to Christ, and being able to listen to things that you don't want to hear is an important trait for anyone. Um, and to think about how that, in doing that, is one small example that makes you more positioned to become with Christ is quite remarkable, and how there's all kinds of little stepping stones that we often take for granted, but at the end of the day are really the only way to truly live a happy life. And coincidentally, it also really lines up well when you listen to what Jesus said of having a good life in all aspects, and it doesn't hold you back from anything. It doesn't detract. It's only been an additive or a multiplier, never subtractive or divider. So I wanted to kind of put that thought in here as we're coming down the home stretch of today's episode.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. I mean, we just can't emphasize enough, especially because we're so not oriented to this in our culture, the importance of relationships. I experienced this very concretely when I became a novice at St. Vincent Arch Abbey. In my first year in the monastery, our first year is called the novitiate. We're novices. And I had 5 classmates, so 6 of us entered at the same time. And my novice master, who was originally from Hungary, and I don't know if he had this idea more inherently because people tend to be a little bit more relational maybe in Europe, or if he just developed that because he was a good faithful Catholic. But Father Sebastian would always emphasize with us, do it together. And we had to ask permission to do different things, see a concert or to go to a show or to visit the nuns down the road or something like that. And we learned pretty quickly, if we wanted to do it alone, almost certainly he would say no. If we came and said all 6 of us want to do it together, he would almost certainly say yes. And I remember how much I felt the weight of that. Like, I don't want to work together with these other guys to get on the same page about something. I just want to do the thing. And so overcoming that really deep-seated individualism, I can't say I've overcome it, but certainly my novitiate was helpful in breaking me of that and pushing me to do things with people and to become more inclusive, more relational, more have a real desire to do it together, to be together, to support each other. And I think, some of the very common sins, whether it's like binging Netflix or even worse, falling into pornography or some of these very selfish and isolating sins, I think really play on our inclination to be very individualistic in our world today. And so any way we can break through those barriers is just so important.
And that's a great action step for us all to take moving forward, and trying to think about how we could implement something like that into our lives, how to become more connected and less individualistic. So we thank you for being your time here tonight, Father, and we will be with everyone here again next week.